And while you're thinking about disruption to workforce, you should also be thinking about how AI is going to impact jobs for young people who will soon be graduating and soon be part of that workforce, and thinking about how AI impacts learning and cognitive understanding and how that will impact readiness, for the workforce, and sort of helping to kind of bring that picture together through a lens of workforce, which is what they're already thinking about, helps make it click and sort of say, okay, this is one of the ways to think about it.
Welcome to Not Another AI podcast, where we're not just talking about AI, we're hearing from the women and non-binary individuals using it to build, lead, and reimagine what's possible.
We're three women from different corners of tech, and we've created this show as a project of Women Defining AI, a global community helping women and non-binary individuals learn, build, and lead with AI.
In this podcast, we talk to folks from different corners of the AI ecosystem who share real stories, practical tools, and bold ideas making AI more accessible, equitable, and human-centered.
This is Not Another AI podcast. Let's get into it.
Today, we'll explore the role AI is playing in classrooms, teacher training, and global education systems with Loni Mahanta, someone at the forefront of it all. Welcome, Loni.
Thank you for having me.
Loni is the Chief Operating Officer at aiEDU, a nonprofit working to ensure all K-12 students are prepared to thrive in an AI-powered world. She's also a seasoned legal and policy expert with past experience as the head of policy at Lyft and deep expertise in public interest tech. In a recent op-ed, she called AI education the new space race and challenged U.S. leaders to take bold, inclusive action. Loni, I'm excited to have this conversation with you today because I have 3 kids. And although I spend a lot of time working in AI as a lawyer working in emerging technology, I don't know very much about AI in education. So I'm really curious. I would love to start today by hearing about your journey. What was your professional path from law and tech policy to leading at aiEDU, and how did it prepare you for this moment in AI in education?
In a lot of ways, what brought me here was not some well thought out, planned, clear line to get me to where I am right now at the AI Education Project, which we call aiEDU. I started in a more traditional legal background. I was at the law firm for a long time. About 10 years ago, I was interested in going in-house. I'd spent a lot of time in the law firm and was curious about what in-house life would look like. Of course, everything was happening in tech. I was in San Francisco and just seeing there was a lot happening. I found my way into Lyft, and I was one of the first attorneys there. I went to law school with the then general counsel, reached out to her and was asking her about what it might be like, and ended up getting a job there, and it changed the trajectory of my career for sure. I was handling at Lyft issues around the independent contractor classification of drivers. And at the time, the organization was handling these issues from a legal perspective, and there was a lot of legal issues to manage there, sort of internal product counseling, all kinds of things, working with the policy team. But over time, it became clear that that issue was not inherently legal. It was showing up as a legal issue, but it was much bigger than that. It was a policy and normative issue. It was also an operational one because it sort of pinned the entire structure of the gig economy. And once that became clear to me, I pitched the founders and said, as an organization, we should be thinking about this in a different way. They agreed, and a couple weeks later, I was no longer on the legal team, and I was leading what we were calling the Future of Work org. And that really was my foray into tech policy, and I just found it to be incredibly interesting. It was thinking about how new technology impacts society and how it interplays with old, policy and legislative and legal structures. I was working with policymakers to think about how do we achieve the goals, the normative goals that these policymakers have, while still allowing technology to flourish. And that was this place where I was like, oh, how do we think about technology? What happens when it, hits all of our lives and it has an impact on our lives in these different ways? So I really liked that aspect of law, technology, policy. And when it was time to leave Lyft, I wanted to engage in that similar work in different industries. And so that really brought me to the next career transition, brought me to this moment of, well, everything is happening in AI. There's so much that's going on right now. You can just see this is going to have a huge impact on all of our lives in society. And I was like, well, where is there a role for me to be engaged in it? I'd done a lot of work on the workforce side, and education was just one step before that as we think about how AI is going to affect our lives and communities. I also have kids. So thinking about that, and one thing came to another, and here I am.
Amazing. I mean, obviously, you bring such a strong background in law and public policy to your current leadership. So, how does that shape your approach to supporting the mission of AI in schools?
When I started at aiEDU, we didn't engage right away in policy work directly. We are a service organization. We are on the ground. We are in schools with teachers and school districts. And so we are really a direct services organization. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't jumping into the policy conversation too quickly, even though there was a lot to talk about, because we're not fundamentally a policy org. However, what became clear to us over time is that we are learning a huge amount as we are talking with schools, and we are seeing on a day-to-day level how different teachers and school systems are approaching and navigating AI. And that is important for policymakers to learn about and hear about, because policymakers are aware of, generally speaking, what AI is going to have a huge impact, is having a huge impact. But breaking it out by industry, by ways of use, different types of application, that requires somebody to come in and do that conversation. We were like, okay, now it is time for us to come in and to start to have these conversations. And so my prior experience there has been very informative, from thinking about coalition building, how important it is to work with other organizations in the space. It's rarely just about us. Like, there's a lot of other nonprofits that are operating in the space. We work together with them, we pull together, and we engage as groups. We also think a lot about framing the work that we do through a lens of where that policymaker is already coming from. And that is big learning. I mean, it kind of sounds obvious once you're doing it, but that isn't often how tech would approach engaging with policymakers. They would often start from their perspective of why this technology is useful and good and great, as opposed to understanding what a policymaker's fear might be, what their worry
Mm-hmm.
might be, or what the issue is that they're currently thinking about. And so helping through that lens really makes a big difference. For example, I found that, especially in the early days when we were having these conversations with state and federal lawmakers, they weren't really thinking about AI in education. They were maybe thinking about AI and national security. We saw a lot of that. AI and issues like privacy and maybe copyright. So those were things that people were thinking about. And AI and workforce. Those are the big topics that were on top of people's minds. So I'd use the workforce lens to help them understand that education is not entirely about work, but it is part of that conversation. And while you're thinking about disruption to workforce, you should also be thinking about how AI is going to impact jobs for young people who will soon be graduating and soon be part of that workforce, and thinking about how AI impacts learning and cognitive understanding, and how that will impact readiness, for the workforce, and helping to bring that picture together through a lens of workforce, which is what they're already thinking about, helps make it click and say, okay, this is one of the ways to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear you saying you had to meet the legislators where they are in their current understanding, and then bring them along to connect the dots on the importance of upskilling our future workforce, right?
Exactly.
So, I mean, that's a good segue. As the COO of an educational nonprofit, what's the biggest opportunity and the biggest risk that you see in integrating AI into education systems today?
I see a huge amount of opportunity around, personalized learning, access to support tools. I think tools for neurodivergent learners is a really huge opportunity. There is so much potential here to have tools that are more tailored towards students and what their specific needs are, especially when there are not enough teachers aides, like we're already, under resourced. So there is a possibility and potential for AI to be very additive in that way. And I think even broader than that, when I think about the creative potential that AI can enable, it can take a kernel of curiosity, something that you want to do or are interested in, and it allows you to just go so quickly and so far with it. That potential, I think, is really exciting. And my husband and I are using AI, and we're trying to help our kids understand the right ways and wrong ways to use AI tools, we think about as an additive tool to support creativity. That is something that I think is very exciting and a lot of potential. The other side of it, though, is very real too. I also think that there is a huge amount of risk and There's also real downsides. I mean, one, there's a real just baseline challenge that every school and teacher and anybody that's thinking about education for kids has to grapple with, which is it is very easy to bypass learning through AI systems, right? Any essay, even an analysis of your own essay, you just ask the question and you put in ChatGPT and you get something back. That is real. And so we have to think about how do we restructure learning? How do we think about what are we really trying to get at? What's the purpose of this assignment? And, work through some of that. So that's one baseline risk. In the longer run, I suspect that we're likely to see actually too much AI in under-resourced communities and underfunded schools and not too little AI. AI is going to be cheaper than people. There's probably going to be a lot of AI in some schools, and the wealthier communities are going to continue to have humans and have people, teachers there that are like giving that like individualized
Interesting.
engagement with people. And we're already seeing that, I would say, in other types of technology. The people that I know that are in tech, they're almost the last ones to let their kids have phones, right?
Yeah.
We see that. And I think it's going to be an extension of that. And so being aware that an immediate reliance into these cheaper, accessible AI tools might actually go to the communities, not in the way that we think right now.
That's so interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. The value of, a human, a teacher who is really connected to the student and bringing them along in their journey and knows all the things about that student becomes a point of disparity.
And I think that there's a real risk of that like widening gap and who gets guidance. Somebody once said to me, like, I don't understand why you even focus on AI literacy. Every kid is going to outperform their teacher on using a new technology. And that is undoubtedly true. But there's a difference between like using it, like knowing how to like open it up and like use social media versus knowing what the impact of social media is, or having the like meta level understanding of what the tools are and like risky ways to use it or appropriate ways to use it versus just using tools reflexively without guidance. And so like who's going to get guidance, who's going to be kind of given more input and engagements from another human versus just being thrown to the wolves.
Interesting. Backtracking for a second on your baseline risk of skipping over, fundamental learning. I was reading Anthropic recently published a blog, right, with statistics on how its models are being used by students. And it reported that almost 50% of queries at this point are direct questions to get an answer versus the additive, or create me a quiz to test me. And so that seems like it's a very real issue that's going to have to be dealt with. I want to go back to personalization and engagement, which you mentioned both. You just talked a little bit about engagement and the value of that and the importance. And then personalization, talk a little bit about what that looks like. What actually is that within the AI context for different students?
I think some of that remains to be seen. When I think about it through my own children, I think about what are the places that my daughter, if she's needing some assistance on a math, right? How do we think about the support that she needs without just getting her an answer or an answer that also shows the work, but does that supportive guidance, like more like what a teacher would do to help bring them along? I think that those are the possibilities where right now she has a parent who I sometimes can help her. She's already outpacing me on math, but theoretically, I'm a parent that could help her. But for a kid that doesn't have a parent at home to help them for whatever reason, there is a real benefit to them having some type of AI tool that can help give them that guidance on additional learning. I think some of that, I mean, like exactly what those tools look like, I don't know, but I think that is one of the ways to think about how it can be additive for an individual student as they're navigating their learning
Okay. Yeah,
process.
that makes sense. Obviously, I'm really curious as I want to support my junior in high school, and I do see him using AI more and more in ways that are surprising me. He had some finals recently, and he told me he was using it to make quizzes and quiz himself, and was actually doing a little bit of RAG where he's tying the materials that he's been given in a custom GPT and then using a chatbot to ask questions and learn in that way. So it's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you touched on disparities, and I'm curious, how is aiEDU working to ensure AI tools are advancing equity in education and not reinforcing existing gaps?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really critical piece about how we operate and how we try to show up in the world. So, first and foremost, I'd say all of our curriculum is free and open source and available to anybody to use. We have curriculum that teachers can use in classrooms with students, sort of bite-sized materials around AI literacy and AI readiness that are problems to talk through. In a lot of ways, they're analog. Like they're not AI tools themselves. They are talking about AI. It's understanding how systems are built in age appropriate ways and talking about things like ethical use of AI and bias that is inherently built into AI systems, helping them understand, talking through issues. One of our snapshots is around a farmer using facial recognition technology to assess, issues that the cows, might be having. Okay, we can have a conversation about that. And then prompting with, okay, now what if this facial recognition technology is being used in other ways? What if it's being used by law enforcement? And then you can use that as a way to talk about bias that is built in the system and what kind of faces are being trained. And so like what that shows up when, perhaps these technologies are used on different communities. And so having this way to talk about the continuum of a specific idea, but having that a prompt as a way to talk about it. So we have a lot of these different snapshots that are used anywhere from kindergarten up through 12th grade, and across different subjects as well. And so that curriculum, those snapshots are available to anybody to use always. And we intend to have that be the case for as long as we are around. And then we also think about the school systems that we are working with. We are working with public school systems and trying to ensure that we are getting to the students that are furthest back from the line to the extent that we are able to, and ensuring that we're not just working with the students, for instance, whose parents are thinking about these issues and are trying to get them access, right? This is part of the reason when we've gone through the work of who do we work with? How do we get to students? It was really important for us to work with school systems. If we did after school programs, that would be great. That would reach some subset of kids, but that would be more an opt-in thing. The parents that are already realizing this is something that they should be engaging with their kids with. If you go through school systems, if you work with administrators and you go top down, you're going to get to more kids, the kids who wouldn't otherwise be getting exposure to these concepts around AI literacy and AI readiness. And then we think segmenting down even from there is, for instance, we do a lot of work in rural and indigenous communities. And we have some grants that are specifically focused on rural and indigenous communities. And when we work in some indigenous communities, we partner with nonprofits to adapt our materials to be culturally relevant and culturally appropriate for those communities. So for instance, we work with this organization called Indigitize. We've done projects with them before, and we're going to do more going forward to adapt our own materials for, the communities that they're engaged with themselves.
I love that. That's really incredible. I'm glad that they're available as a resource. I'm curious, in that picture you just painted, touched on parents in a way almost as a blocker, and the reason why you go direct to schools, and that makes sense, so that your curriculum is embedded in what all the kids are going to receive. But how do you fold parents into the learning journey? Because you educate teachers and you're educating students, but obviously parents are this third leg of the stool
So
in order
true.
for it to be successful.
Yeah, it's really true. And it's interesting. I would say that we are thinking right now about how do we work more effectively and more deeply with parents, because we knew that it was important, but we were like, oh, I don't know if that's our role to be sort of thinking about engagement with parents. In reality, I think it is. I think that we're going to find over time that it is just as important for us to engage with parents. And anecdotally, what I find is that parents of high school kids are more likely to be aware of AI and AI's impact on their kids' education and perhaps have questions about future jobs. But middle school and primary school parents, unless they're already working in tech, have no understanding of how much AI is going to be impacting their kids' day-to-day lives, just even in school, let alone everything else that is to come from AI companions and, all of that other social emotional impact. But parents are not really aware of it. I don't think that a lot of parents really see the storm that is right in front of us that we're all going to be needing to navigate.
And I want to get to that in a minute as we touch on, China's response to upskilling its own future workforce. But before we leave this topic of, equity and AI in education. I'm curious, what does responsible AI mean when we're talking about kids and classrooms and learning outcomes? And how is AI EDU including teachers and students and families in defining what that is?
When I think about responsible AI as it relates to our focus as an organization, I think about human-centric AI. I think that that comes from, as it shows up for us, we're focused on co-creating with teachers and engaging with teachers first. There are some people out in the space that talk about AI is can like replacing teachers and we don't need teachers. That is very much not our approach. We think that like teachers are first and foremost the most important part of our education system. They've been asked to do far too much for far too long with not enough resources. There is a potential benefit, and we didn't talk about this with the benefits, but this is another real benefit of helping give time back to teachers as well, to maybe take away some of the things that take a huge amount of time from them and allow them to spend more time on the things that they went into teaching for in the first place, focusing on the skills that we think remain important in this age of AI, the things that remain inherently human: critical thinking, communications, these durable skills, communication, collaboration, and bringing that focus is a really important piece of what we do. So focus on teachers, for instance. Ways in which we do that: we build with teachers, we co-create with teachers, we have communities of practice. So one of our groups is called Trailblazers, and we have a group of teachers that we work with, and we iterate with them, and we get feedback from them and hear how things are working and try to get people that are on the ground and like working directly with them to see what the real takeaway is. And we take those learnings and we bring that back and we put that into all the other materials that we put out there. So when we think about responsible AI for us, we really think about that as putting humans first, human judgment first. And that's both around teachers and being supportive and additive to teachers, and then also focusing on student agency and student engagement. And so really putting people first and AI as supportive is, really one of the main ways that we think about what responsible AI means.
Right. This is so cool. I didn't know much about aiEDU and the work that you're doing. You're not only doing important work that's meeting the moment, as AI explodes and we all try to figure out how to use it safely and responsibly, but you're doing it in a really thoughtful way that's inclusive, given some of the examples that you shared here today. So thank you. I want to switch gears to talk about, the global landscape and touch on your recent op-ed for the 74, where you called AI education the new space race, especially in response to China's sweeping recent mandate that all students become AI literate. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what's happening in China and what that mandate is, and then what does the U.S. need to do to stay competitive and, more importantly, inclusive?
Yeah, China and other countries too, I believe South Korea, we've seen things in Singapore, are really intentionally focused on AI literacy for their entire school systems, all the way from kindergarten all the way up through the educational system. And that's a recognition, I think, of the importance of AI literacy, so understanding what AI is and how to use it, both from a citizen perspective, but also I'm sure for technological development and ensuring that they have a group of young people that are coming up that are ready to continue to drive AI development forward. So both, developers on the technological side and also from the ability to use these tools and be ready for the age of AI. We're seeing it, it's happening. And harkening back to the earlier part of the conversation, we talk about meeting policymakers where they are. When policymakers a year ago were talking about AI and its impact on the US, and they were thinking about national security, they weren't really talking about it from how do we make sure all US citizens are ready for the age of AI? It was a different form of national security. It was much more actual physical security and weapons and things like that, right? When we're talking, I'm like, this is also what we mean by what's in the national interest, is ensuring that like we as a populace are not left behind as everything is developing really, really quickly, but that requires a lot of intentional engagement on these issues. And it's not like we haven't done it before. As a country we have, which is why I was writing about the space race and how that spurred a huge amount of investment into STEM and into science and technology. There is the possibility for us to recognize that this is a critically important moment, and we need to be thinking about it all the way from our youngest parts of our communities to be ready for this. The challenge, of course, is that China and some of these other countries have a much more top-down approach to education. much more centralized, and have the ability to say, this is what we're doing, and everybody's going to do it. That's not the way our education system is set up in the US. We have very decentralized education systems. We obviously have states that do their own thing, but even within states, states run their own systems very differently. California, for instance, is very decentralized. School districts have a lot of autonomy to manage things as they want. Some states have a much more centralized, for lack of a better word, State Department of Education that can push down rules and requirements all the way through. So there's a variety of different models. We don't really have one channel to kind of push everything through. So it's going to require a lot more work. That's why we do a lot of our work on a state by state basis, because you kind of have to do it. It's the only way to get to everybody if we're going to.
Right.
There is a chance that there's also a part of what we offer, what we have, our decentralized system also does allow for a lot of creativity and iterations and experimenting. And if people are doing that and share those learnings, that will actually be, I think, an added benefit that we as a country uniquely have. And so we need to have organizations like aiEDU, but a lot of other nonprofits and civil society organizations that are highlighting those and are sharing those best practices. And so that we have superintendents in Florida sharing with, superintendents in Ohio, and superintendents in Anaheim sharing, up in Bakersfield, right? So there is the possibility to share these learnings, but it does require intentionality.
Right. It sounds like it's a challenge, actually. Hopefully there are advocates in this space who are thinking about it and trying to create some kind of unified vision.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I would say that everybody's grappling. And I think one of the other risks that I didn't mention earlier, but I think another real challenge is that the pace of technology is moving so incredibly quickly. AI development is moving so quickly. So even setting aside AI regulation, which is a whole other much larger topic, even setting that aside, when we talk with policymakers, federal policymakers are regularly like, what is it for us to do here? Because education typically lives at the state level. So where do they engage? Is it just funding? Is it just direction? Is it just saying that these are the things that we think are important and giving our imprimatur on it? Or is there more? And at the state level, we have state lawmakers and committees and groups that we talk to. They are engaged, they do want to do work, and they're trying to figure out how do they do it and how do they keep up. Some states have done a lot. We worked very closely with the state of Ohio and the then lieutenant governor to create statewide policies that went through the entirety of Ohio, which was a really, really wonderful development, actually, to see that a state can do something and really drive hard on AI literacy and AI readiness and get all the way through. There are some unique facets of the way Ohio's education is set up so that it doesn't necessarily easily replicate, but it is one way to think about it. And so state leadership, I think, matters a great deal.
And what other states besides Ohio are leading on this issue?
I would say right now, this is also partly just because who we've worked with, Ohio really has been excellent. We are starting to do some more work across Michigan, and we have work in school districts across the country. We work at a lot of school districts in California, but it's not necessarily that top-down engagement. And so we also have some pilot work top-down with the governor's office in Colorado. So some of these things are starting to happen also at the state level, and continuing to figure out where we go from here.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I would like to switch gears for a second and learn a little bit more about your own AI use, how you're using it in your daily work and profession, and any tools you love or interesting and surprising use cases.
I don't know if any of this will be surprising. We'll see. And I use ChatGPT and a legal tool called GCAI basically every day. For me, it's a lot of drafting of first drafts of documents, strategy documents. I use it for a lot of brainstorming. I have another person there to engage with and talk through issues. Sometimes if I have a complex email to write, I'll just, dictate to ChatGPT and ask it to synthesize and put the thoughts down on paper for me. I think one of the other things as an organization that we're working on and trying to codify or help share information is to start to explain how we are using it very, very practically and sharing that to other teams. Because even though we are an organization that is focused on AI education, that is literally what we do all day long, we don't really still have a very specific way to share with each other exactly what we're doing, and other than ad hoc sharing. So we're trying to get better about it and figure out how we convey some of that. And then I mentioned GCAI, but that's a legal tool that I use, and I use it very regularly. It has
I do too. I love it.
really, really good.
Yeah.
And it has changed my ability to get through a lot of basic legal documents and things like that so much more quickly, and I think efficiently and effectively than what I would have been able to do before.
Yeah, I think especially for solo practitioners like yourself, you're the only in-house legal. A tool like GCAI is your thought partner, right? In a lot of ways.
But then another thing that like we're doing right now, and this is actually my husband and not me, he is a writer, he's a creative guy, and he always has been. And when he started out in exploring AI, he was probably one of the biggest AI skeptics and just furious actually that AI was being dropped on all of us and is threatening to decimate the creative industries and doing something that none of us asked for. So he really came at it with some real hot takes about this. And as time has progressed, he has started to actually build a tool that is enhancing, I would say, the creative ideas of kids and himself in a way that is additive and not usurping the creativity. So it starts with a kernel of an idea, seed, ask a question to a kid about an idea or a story, and then it'll do some prompt, almost like Mad Lib style prompts to be like, okay, and what is this character doing? Where are they going? And then it'll build a whole imagery around it, these really incredible pictures of the bunny rabbit that is an astronaut in the, broccoli forest, right? And the kids are so engaged in it because you immediately see it and then you can like build this story. So it's building these worlds, but it is not taking over the creativity from the kid.
Right.
It's
Incredible.
expanding it.
Incredible. I think that's a great example of the evolution of how we're all thinking about AI and experiencing it. And we're at the beginning of our journey with that. I mean, we have a ways to go. So, Loni, I want to thank you so much for such a thoughtful conversation with me today. There's a lot of nuggets of wisdom in here that you've shared, and I really find your role and the organization's work very, very interesting and really important at this moment. So thank you for that. You've reminded us that AI education isn't just about coding or chatbots. It's about power and access and preparing students for a rapidly changing world. And your policy-rooted approach at the organization shows what's possible when equity meets innovation. So for our listeners today, definitely check out aiEDU's free curriculum at www.aiedu.org and consider how you can bring AI literacy to your school or community. We'll see you next time on Not Another AI Podcast, where we're all building the future of AI together.